He overheard me coming home late with my lover when I told him I was going out with female friends. I cheated on my fiancé with a gold digger. Yes, you read that right. I was caught by him red-handed. I didn't know. I didn't know he was around. I thought he was halfway across the world and not waiting with roses, candles, and a goddamn ring. He was waiting inside my home to propose to me. The proposal I've dreamt of all my life, and I ruined everything. Just exactly how did I ruin everything, you might wonder? Well, he overheard me driving in and coming home late with my lover when I had told him I was going out with female friends. That night, I didn't know. I could have. Maybe I definitely would have avoided that situation, that worst nightmare of mine. But I wouldn't know that now because I basically used my own hands, or should I say desires, to destroy everything we built together. And now all I'm left with are shambles of what I could have had, but lost sorely because I was stupid and unwise. Thoughts of what I could have done to avoid that situation race through my head all day and night now. I know what you must all think of me. Hear me out first before you judge. I'm pretty sure the judgment would be against me, but still, this is the one space I've got to properly express myself. So before you judge me, hear me out first. Let me quickly introduce myself. Hello, Reddits. My name is Sophia. Yeah, my name is spelled without the PH in it. I'm 29, would be 30 soon. I grew up in a small town with my mother, who passed away shortly after I was a senior in high school. I had to stay a year back home to work to pay my bills myself. It wasn't easy sponsoring myself, but I had no choice but to fend for myself. But luckily for me, I was a bright student, so the teachers registered me for a scholarship program, and I got in. And through the scholarship program, I was able to get into college and get through it. Well, I met Alex, disclaimer, this is not his real name, and any other names here too are fake, but just for description's sake, only my name is real, during my freshman year of college. He was a sophomore at the time, and I was immediately drawn to his charming smile and kind eyes. We met in our psychology class, and I was impressed by his intelligence and insight during our class discussions. He was smart, brilliant, and really handsome, and that made him a catch. We became good friends, and I secretly liked him, but I obviously didn't want to ruin our friendship by trying to pursue more than that, so I just stuck to being his friend and study buddy. As we spent more time together, I found myself falling for him more and more. He was my rock, supporting me through the ups and downs of college life. We studied together, explored the campus, and even went on road trips together. By the end of my freshman year, we were inseparable. Alex asked me out during our senior year, and I said yes without hesitation. He was my first love, and though I wasn't his first love, I knew he loved me deeply and would do anything for me. I honestly thought our relationship would last a lifetime. I mean, it should have. It would have if it hadn't been for my own stupidity. I had to just go ruin everything. As I mentioned earlier, I made a mistake that changed everything. I cheated on him. You're probably wondering why I did that when all I described above has been nothing short of perfect love. But it was my fault. I heeded the wrong advice and sought after the wrong relationship, and I ended up miserable and alone. I first met Mika when I was already a sophomore. We became close friends, and after Alex, she was the next closest friend I had. Mika was the gentlest person I knew, and she was so easy to talk to. I confided in her about everything that happened to me, including anything that involved Alex. But sadly then, I know the reason why now. They weren't best of friends and only tolerated each other because of me. Alex was always disapproving of her, and I thought it was because he knew I told her everything. Stupid me. Whenever I asked Mika why she didn't like Alex, she would just come up with different excuses, like she wasn't exactly sure he had the right intentions for me, or that he looked like a playboy. I would wave off her excuses and tell her to trust me. Alex clearly adored me. I didn't know why she wasn't seeing it then. When Alex graduated, I was happy and at the same time sad to see him go, because we wouldn't see each other as often as we did before. But I was comforted by Mika, as in her words, I still had her, and I was then indeed happy I had her in my corner. I focused on graduating with good grades just like Alex did, and as I promised him I would. I didn't go out as much as when Alex was still around. It was Mika who would try to force me out and go out and have fun. She was very protective of me, and if any guy tried to approach me, she would do the chasing away on my behalf. She was like my bodyguard. The only difference is she didn't have bulky shoulders and muscles as they usually do. I was comfortable with her doing that because it meant I could easily keep myself for Alex and not spend any time trying to fight off male attention. Our final year on campus was gruesome due to the loads of work we had to put in, but Alex specifically kept me going with words of encouragement, the occasional visits when he could, and directions. He was the one who noticed that my female friends who were always around didn't come around again. I wouldn't have even noticed because Mika was always around if Alex hadn't mentioned it. I remember going to meet Tina, one of my very good friends, and asking her why she stopped hanging out with me. She refused to say anything, but eventually came out with it when I pleaded and forced her to. She reminded me of the fact that Mika was always around me and gave almost nearly no space for others. And I was surprised but still didn't bother too much about it until another friend mentioned something like that again. I remember paying attention to how she behaved around me, and then I realized that she was indeed behaving like a jealous partner. I couldn't understand why she was behaving like that, so I tried avoiding her and having her around so much in my space, until she called me one day and told me how sick she was and she was alone. Worried, I had rushed over, but only to see that she wasn't sick, and told me she had lied just to get my attention again and asked why I was avoiding her. I explained, and shockingly, she had tried to kiss me. I avoided it and angrily warned her not to show up again in my place. Since then till we graduated, I avoided her as much as I could. I honestly admit that I almost went into it because I really liked Mika, but at that point, I didn't want to confuse myself. I was straight. I had a loving boyfriend who loved me as much as I loved him. I didn't want to ruin that. I remember Alex had asked about Mika when he sensed she wasn't hovering around me as she usually was. I had given him flimsy excuses and asked that we forget about her. After graduation, life was a bit hard, and it was quite hard to get a decent job, even with good grades from college. Especially as a girl, every boss wanted something I couldn't give. Alex was there struggling with his startup company because there wasn't enough capital. It was really frustrating, but we were there for each other through it all. It was until 2 years after I had graduated that everything started going well for us. I got a job, and Alex's company started picking up. We were happy and continued to work hard. And after almost 10 years of dating and 8 years of graduation, 9 for Alex, I was starting to get agitated. Alex's company had become one of the most sought after to work with, and he was fast making his way in the business world. I was also working and doing well for myself, so we were financially stable enough to be married. But Alex wouldn't want to have any topic of it. Years were passing, and I was getting desperate, but Alex would always avoid topics that revolved around marriage. He was either improving on another diverse business or traveling around and barely had time for me again. It was upsetting. It was around this time I met Collins. He had been the sweetest guy. I was the one who employed him because he had charmed me in the interview. I admit I didn't exactly approve of him entirely based on his criteria, but mostly because I was drawn to him, and I knew I had to see him again. I ignored my guilt for dismissing a person that was more qualified than he was and looked forward to working with him. He proved his worth and was so hardworking that I couldn't help but admire him more. He was also whispered to be the most handsome amongst the workers in the office, so everyone liked working with him. I agreed, but never actually voiced my opinion to anyone. Believe me, I tried hard to stay faithful to Alex, but it wasn't easy. Alex and I had arguments most of the time. Mostly I was the one usually causing the fights and Alex trying to soothe me, but it was still stressful and frustrating because he didn't get the point. I wanted a family, I wanted to have kids and settle down. Having a long-term relationship for 10 years was not fun anymore, and I was starting to get really desperate. Alex didn't understand why I wanted to rush into everything. One day we had gotten into our usual arguments and Alex had to travel, so he couldn't soothe my nerves as he usually did because he would have had to miss his flight, so he left. I wasn't happy and was in a very bad mood through the day, snapping at anyone who did or didn't do anything right. I stayed late in the office afterward. There was no one I could go meet at home anyway, so I just decided to get some work done. So by the time I got home, I would just go to bed and zone out. There was a knock on my door, and I was surprised because I thought everyone had left already, so I muttered a "come in." It was Collins. He wanted to check on me and see if I was all right and if I wanted to share anything that was the matter with me. I don't know why I did just that. Alex was my only best friend and lover. After what had happened with Micah, I didn't have any other close friends except for Alex. But Alex was the one causing me distress, and I just wanted to tell someone how I felt without being seen as too desperate. He listened to me talk and only made little contributions to it, encouraging me to go on, and I talked about everything that had happened right from when we had met until that moment. At that time, it was really comforting telling someone else besides my own self what I felt like, and because the person was actually paying attention. Maybe that was why I did what I did. I wouldn't know anymore because now it doesn't feel like an excuse to have done what I did. I don't know who made the first move that day, but before I knew it, we were already kissing and desperately peeling each other's clothes off. Yes, we had sex in the office. I was ashamed of myself and couldn't even bring myself to take Alex's call when he called that night, probably to apologize. I felt really bad that I had done that, especially with someone I had just met. I knew I couldn't let that happen again if I wanted to keep my relationship, but we continued our affair. We would sneak out during lunch breaks and go hang out. He was like a fresh breath of air in my stuffy relationship. I was happier, and it showed even to Alex. I had given up talking about getting married. I still had it in mind though. But as much as I liked having Colin around, I knew I loved Alex and couldn't replace him with Colin. But as the days went by, my affair with Colin's continued, and I found myself feeling more and more guilty. I knew I was betraying Alex's trust, but I couldn't help the way I felt. Colin's was everything Alex wasn't in some ways, attentive, passionate, and eager to please. I started to keep my distance from Alex all because of my own guilt, but despite that, I still couldn't get myself to stop. Funnily, Colin didn't even promise me marriage, the one thing I desperately wanted. But yet I found myself wanting to be around him still, and most especially having sex with him. You all might wonder why I had felt desperate to settle in marriage, but it isn't entirely my fault. I was a result of my father's affair with my mother, and they never got married. I was always that unwanted child because my dad was already married with kids who felt it necessary to remind me that I was illegitimate. My aunt too, Mariah, didn't get married and also had a child out of wedlock, so I was determined I wasn't going to end that way too. I wanted to get married and give birth to kids that were legitimate and have the security of both parents. It wasn't easy having to live with my mom alone and being questioned by everybody about where my dad was. And when I was even with my dad, I didn't feel like family because his wife and kids ensured I knew I wasn't one of them. I gave up eventually in the long run, trying to please my dad and trying to belong with his perfect family. It was exhausting. So I had stopped and swore to myself that I wouldn't do that to any kid I had. If I gave birth, I wanted that child in the security of a home that had both its parents and never having to please one party to be accepted. Alex didn't understand that about me. I mean, how could he though? I never told him anything about it. But then I had expected that since he loved me and I loved him too, it was enough for us to start a family and we both were doing well at work. But Alex didn't share my thoughts. He thought marriage could come later so long as we loved each other. That was all that mattered. I had shared that feeling with Colin, and he understood me perfectly. What I wanted, why I wanted what I wanted, and how frustrating it was for me not getting it. So I guess it made sleeping with him all the more justified in my head. He understood me. That was all that mattered. I craved the attention he gave me, and I was overjoyed when I got it. He pampered me, not exactly monetarily, but in other aspects, if you know what I mean. I earned more than he did, so I wasn't so bothered that I spent all the money on our dates or whenever we were together. I felt happy doing things for him, buying him new clothes, paying his bills, and sorting some things out for him. One time, I even paid his mortgage, and then I didn't suspect anything. He became my best friend, and I talked to him more than I did with Alex. I guess spending all that much time with Colin meant less time with Alex, but I didn't exactly notice because I was happy, and I didn't mind at that point. But Alex must have noticed, and he started spending less time traveling. He wanted to suddenly go on dates and surprise me with flowers at work. I was pleasantly surprised, but I guess that didn't sit well with Colin because he was beginning to get jealous, and I knew I had to do some damage control. I knew that time he wanted to buy himself a car and had been saving up for it. I sent him the rest of the money he needed to get himself a car, And as I predicted, it elevated his mood and made him very happy. And as for Alex, though I was happy I was finally getting the attention that I had desperately craved for, it just renewed my feeling of guilt because I knew what I was doing behind his back. I tried not to let it show, though, by trying to look genuinely surprised and happy whenever he got me something. He suddenly became interested in talking to me about my plans and ideas for the future. He asked about my past. At first I was suspicious, but then I discovered that he genuinely wanted to know, not because he wanted to know what caught my attention. I confided in him about things I had told Colin, and he was there for me, promising me everything that I had always wanted to hear for the longest of time. It was then that Alex confided in me too about his parents. Apparently they'd been married but had been forced to marry because his mom got pregnant with him. It was a loveless marriage, and his father cheated so much on his mom, and he watched her cry and cry every day in pain of the torment dished out by his own father. He had since then promised himself that he wouldn't be stuck with any woman in marriage because he had seen firsthand what that did to people. But when he had met me and fallen in love with me, he was scared of the level of commitment he had wanted to go with me, and that scared him. So apparently, me talking and pestering him about marriage just made it all the more scarier for him. He had asked that I give him time to be able to fully commit to me. He confessed again that night his undying love for me, but he would actually need to get over his fear of marriage to be able to commit fully to me. I remember I had cried that night, not because he was finally saying things I wanted to hear from him, as he thought I was, but because I had already started doing things he couldn't even begin to imagine, and I couldn't even tell him. It would break him because it would just be like repeating history, his father's, and I didn't want that to happen. So I just kept mute that night when he held me to himself, and it was at that moment I wished I had already done things differently from the start of my affair with Collins. I felt like telling him about what I did and asking for his forgiveness there and then, but then I remembered again what he told me and just knew that it would shatter everything we've built for years together. It was unfair of me to cheat on him, but I just couldn't. No, let me correct that. I didn't want to stop. I continued sleeping around with Colin and also developing my relationship with Alex. I felt bad and guilty, but there was no way I could stop myself anymore. I had gone way too far. They both made me feel different things, and I wasn't about to let go just yet of the two. I know. It was selfish of me to think that, but your heart wants what it wants, right? Colin started to demand unreasonable things from me soon enough. Things I couldn't afford sometimes, and had to dig into my savings to actually get them for him. I should have seen it then. How much of a cheat he was, using me for my money, but I guess I didn't want to see it. I rented him a bigger apartment, furnished it, and got him another car. The list went on, and I kept doing them because I had felt then that if I did do them, it would make him happy. And if he was happy, he would make me happy too. It was a win-win situation. Clearly it wasn't, but at that time I didn't see it that way. I wish I had, though. It would have saved me a lot of things it had cost me. One time, one of our workers caught us having a makeout session in my office when she had walked in without knocking. I knew it was dangerous having her in that office because if she ever told anyone, then I was doomed. So I looked for every means to get rid of her, and I eventually did. It was horrible of me, I know, but at that moment, all I thought of was me. I couldn't risk anyone else finding out about my affair with Colin. Well, eventually, it came out when Alex found out in the most dramatic way possible. That turned out to be the worst nightmare of my life eventually, though. Alex had begun traveling again, but at that point, I didn't bother too much because I understood him better now. I did care, but not just as much as I did before, when he did travel to avoid having difficult conversations. Besides, this time was different. He wasn't traveling to avoid anything since we already had that conversation, so when he waved me goodbye that day, I had wished him the same absent-mindedly. I had received a disturbing call earlier that day that my aunt had died. Though she wasn't exactly there for me because she was bedridden all her life due to an accident that nearly cost her life, she was the only family I had left. I didn't consider my father's family part of my life. So it was really saddening, but I just sent my condolences. I didn't want to go back to the slum again. I didn't want to go back to that place, and be reminded of how much of a reject I was by my own father, especially since he relocated there years after my mom had died and still lived there to date. And another thing that was distracting me was Colin's newfound joy in spending my money, but I couldn't complain. I got what I wanted, and he got what he wanted. Or so I thought. I never knew I was losing more than I was gaining, but one thing about desires is that they tended to blind you to the consequences building up, while you concentrated on fulfilling your desires until it becomes too large a consequence that you couldn't even hide yourself. Until that day, that fateful night, Alex had to travel out of town after promising me he was free through the weekends. I was upset, but not too much, as I made plans to see Colin. I remember Alex had called to check how I was doing and where I was. I told him I had decided to go out with my friends, and he had agreed that I needed the time out. We spoke for a while to Colin's dismay, but I just couldn't end the call without risking rousing Alex's suspicion. I had guessed that the call was a way of saying sorry for breaking his promise, so I didn't think he had any sort of plan for me. I should have guessed from all his calls that maybe he might have wanted to surprise me and come back home early, but I was too distracted to notice. He kept calling every hour to check if I was still over at my friend's place, and I confirmed yes each time. Hours later, it was already dark outside, so I had to leave and go back to my apartment, and Colin had surprisingly offered to drive me home. He had driven me home that night, and then gotten out of the car and kissed me to say goodnight. I had been happy, but that happiness was short-lived, as when I got to my door, it was shut weirdly. I tried opening my door with my keys to get into my apartment, but I found it unlocked and even slightly opened, as if expecting someone. The alarm bell rang in my ears, and I tiptoed inside, but almost immediately the room was flooded with light, and then I saw, oh, my worst nightmare and wildest imagination happened right there in my own apartment. Alex had been on one knee amidst the balloons on the floor. He had managed to transform my living room into a romantic setting. The chairs were pushed back further into the room, and everywhere was filled with balloons and candles with soft lights. I would have cried and screamed happily had it been a different situation, but I panicked because I realized that since the door was left slightly open, he must have seen me come out of Colin's car and be kissed by him. I must have screamed in horror because Colin rushed in. He had not left, and that had just worsened the whole situation because Alex looked from me to him and back to me. His eyes were stoic. I couldn't guess what was on his mind. And then again, he just saw us kissing after I had lied to him about going out with my female friends. He then stood up rather slowly, threw the ring on the floor, and walked out. I ran after him to explain, but he just wasn't listening to me and just moved to his car, which I hadn't even noticed before but would have if I hadn't been too distracted. I was too engrossed in Colin to have noticed. I tried to get him to listen to me, but all my efforts were futile, and Alex seemed to have drawn his own conclusion. I mean, anyone could have drawn the conclusion because the evidence was right there, and it would have ended up being the same. I was cheating on my 10-year-old relationship that would have turned into marriage if that beautiful setting in my flat was anything to go by. Alex just left, and just like that, I ruined everything. I didn't even know when Colin left because after Alex drove off, I just ran back inside and cried my heart out. I picked up the ring Alex threw to the floor, and seeing it made my heart ache the more. It was very beautiful, simple, and exactly what I would have chosen if I were the one picking the rings. I put it on my finger and it was a perfect fit, and that just made me sob the more. Alex was finally proposing after years and years of a relationship, and he was finally giving me my one desperate wish. But I ruined everything with my own hands. Oh, I shouldn't forget to mention the most painful and stupid thing that happened the next day. I had gone back to the apartment I bought for Colin. The next day after the whole incident, I had decided that I had to end things with Colin. Yes, I did. I was finally able to think straight and knew that things with Colin couldn't continue like that and that we had to put a stop to it. But I must have taken him by surprise, as he clearly wasn't expecting me after all the drama that happened. And when I tried to go in, he tried to prevent me, which made me all the more suspicious, and I forced my way in only to get the shock of my life. Micah was there. Yes, Mika, my friend from college. Right there in his apartment with only his shirt as the only piece of clothing she had on. And worst thing was, she had a ridiculous smile on her face. I was so speechless and just left the apartment without a word to either of them. I cannot still seem to comprehend what happened. Micah and Colin? They were together. So I just wasted my time and money and ruined my own relationship over Mika's boyfriend. I couldn't believe my height of stupidity. I ruined my own life over nothing. Now Alex didn't want to see me anywhere near him. He made it obviously clear when he blocked every means of me contacting him and even moved away to drive home that point. Just how do you get a man you hurt back? How can I rewrite the wrongs I've done to him? I know he loved me all through those years sincerely and had never cheated on me, but I did. Funnily, cheating on Alex didn't even get me to fulfill my greatest wish of marriage, and I lost every chance of that happening too. Please, I desperately need advice. How can I maybe make this work again? Please. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's been 3 months since that incident. 3 whole tortuous months when I had lost everything. The beautiful relationship I shared with Alex over so little. It hurt so much knowing that all it took was a stupid mistake on my part to understand what I had and lost. I'm reliving that very day, every day now, and wishing maybe if I had done things differently, I could have had a ring on my finger now and be preparing for my wedding. I'm so mad at myself, and all I've done these months was nearly pull my own hair out. Alex didn't want anything to do with me anymore. He ensured I knew that perfectly well. Funnily, Mika sent me a text through Colin's phone. It turned out she planned the whole thing just to have revenge on me for ditching her friendship just like that. Apparently, she had found out Alex and I weren't still married, and she thought it a perfect time to ruin what we had going on. So she planted her gold-digging boyfriend Colin in my face, and obviously, I made the rest so easy for her. I had fallen into the trap and was so blinded to see just what was in front of me, and I was shocked and speechless reading that text that day. So all of this had been because I had rejected her sexual advances. She ruined my life because of that. No, actually I did that by myself. If I hadn't fallen so easily into her trap, then maybe she wouldn't be able to gloat so much. Maybe if I had tried my hardest to push Colin away and not turned into his hands because I thought I needed the comfort, maybe then I'll have my whole life ahead of me and not this black, empty future I seem to have now. I regret everything I did so much and wish I could turn back the hands of time and undo everything. I realize that I've made a huge mistake. I have thrown away a decade-long relationship for a fleeting infatuation. Now, I'm left waiting and wondering how I could have been so stupid to have lost the love of my life forever. Was my desire for excitement and passion worth risking everything? From where I'm standing, it didn't look like it. I really wish I could have done things differently, not become so desperate for a marriage that I turned entirely into someone I wasn't because of that. I'm not sure I can ever forgive myself for what I've done. I thought I was seeking excitement and passion, but in reality, I was destroying the love and future we had built together. Every day, I'm reminded of what I've lost. Alex's smiles, his laughter, and his loving embrace all gone, replaced by the harsh reality of my own making. I'm left to pick up the pieces of my shattered heart and wonder what could have been if only I had been true, if only I had appreciated what we had, if only I had communicated my desires and needs instead of seeking comfort elsewhere, if only I had been honest and transparent. But life doesn't offer do-overs, and now I'm left to face the consequences of my actions. Now, life seemed like it wasn't worth living if I didn't have Alex. I cannot bear having to be alone all through this world, because I couldn't even make the necessary efforts to keep what I had. I'm lost in the what-ifs, forever questioning the choices I made. What if I had been honest? What if I had been true? What if I had appreciated what we had? But life doesn't offer do-overs, and I'm forever stuck with questions and regrets in my head. Update. Hey Reddit, this is my last post here, and I just want to really appreciate the hates I received and the little support I got too from here. I'm still here though. I haven't made any improvements. I'm still stuck in the past and reliving every day of my life regretting giving in to my desires. What made everything worse was the fact that Colin and Mika got into a car accident while drunk driving, and they both ended up bedridden for life. It actually didn't make me feel better as I thought it should have because I made my own hell, and I'm living it. Because I could have easily avoided the whole thing, but I had jumped into it without waiting to see just how many consequences I could attract. So no, It didn't make me feel better when they got into the accident. We all are now in our own abyss, our personal inferno of our very own making. I don't think I'll ever be able to recover from the much harm and damage I caused Alex. I know I'll forever be haunted by the bad decision I made that very night I began having an affair with Colin. I regret everything so badly, wishing right now that I could turn back the hands of time to undo the mistakes, to right my wrongs and not be where I am now, stuck in a time machine that had a glitch, helping me, or should I say killing me painfully and slowly by replaying everything again. Things I could have avoided and what I could have done better. It's really hard having to live with myself. I can barely look at myself anymore because then I'm reminded of how Alex had looked at me that day on his knees, ready to finally commit to me for the rest of our lives. Last words here. Don't ever lose what you have. Don't play dangerous games like I did. Thanks and goodbye.